fresh under mother cries. Listen to fall to the floor.
Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Today's going to be a little bit of a different approach. Those of you that have seen my wall Eversharp video might recognize this pen. It's a remake of the Skyline. It was made in the 90s. Really captured a lot of the detail that existed in the original Skyline, including this nice ribbed sterling cap. But those of you that watched the video may have seen my frustrations about how the pen just didn't write. It skipped a lot. It went dry. So the first thing I did was yank out the nib and feed. And when I saw this feed, I realized that it's not going to be an easy thing to work on, but I'm going to try to open up that channel. The nib's a little bit on the small side, you know, probably like a number 5. I mean, it looks nice, you know, nice engraving, nicely well done. But on the back side, one of the things I noticed, I don't know whether it's going to come out here in the video, was there's some crud or whatever here near the feed between the two tines. So I'm going to clean that out. When I took apart the wall Eversharp modern Skyline to get it to flow better, I looked at this feed and I go, boy, that's an intricate feed. Especially when compared to a Waterman feed, as you see on the far right here. But then I said I'd recognized this feed before, so I pulled out 3 other feeds from 3 different pens just to compare. Here's a Nemosine feed, which is very similar, a little bit longer, but then the nib is bigger. Next to that, we have Franklin Christoph, which is a Jovo nib, and the feed is even more intricate. I like these little holes at the top of the feed there. Could be ink reservoirs, hard to tell. And there's really no channel in this feed. The feed, the ink, it flows from the back here and evidently goes out and comes up through the channel here to feed the nib. And then on the far left is the Visconti, which I've been working on and did a video on. I still don't get that feed to work right, but also there's a very similar design here. But the Franklin Christoph feeds have been no problem. I have some, this is a stub here. They're pretty wet. They flow well. The Nemosine also works extremely well, so I'm hoping to eventually get the wall Eversharp to work the same way. But I just find it amazing how intricate these feeds are for doing a very simple thing. And the Waterman Feed just has a very simple 3 channels, 2 grooves, cut down the middle of the feed. It's a nice long feed, no fins or anything else. We're going to flip these over and look at the back side. We flipped them over. There's also a characteristic that these 4 all have in common, is there's a groove in the back of the feed, which most feel that this is where the ink is drawn up when you draw the ink up. These are all cartridge converters. They're all Basic International, no proprietary, so they all have a very similar end piece here to accept the converter. But all of them have very different channels. The wall Eversharp has a channel all the way up through all the fins, where the other 3 only have a channel for a certain distance, a little bit more than half. The Nemosine comes down pretty good, but then you can see where the fins have been also shortened here. Again, there's a lot of similarities in these very intricate feeds. I'm still not certain all the little nuances, and I don't even know how these things are made. It's probably made in multiple pieces, injection molded and then assembled. And here's the classic Waterman Bakelite feed, the spoon feed as it's called. As you can see, it's extremely plain on the back end. No grooves, no nothing, so the ink would have to feed. When you fill it, the ink fill would have to go up the same channel that the ink comes out when you write. So Again, simple design works well, and to those of you that ever used a Waterman nib, you may have seen some of the vintage ones I write with. The flow is phenomenal. They're extremely wet, and they have flex nibs, which take a lot of ink, and they very seldom ever railroad. So, again, I'd be interested to see what comments people have about these varieties of feeds that each of the pen manufacturers are using. They're fairly intricate, and like I say, the Visconti one, I'm still disappointed with that, and hopefully the Wahl Eversharp one, I'll be able to get it to work. Interested when we looked at the various feeds on how this whole thing fit together with a standard international converter that we have here. You know, they work on the Franklin Christophs, the Edisons, a lot of different pens. This was the feed in the Franklin Christoph, which I was impressed with the level of detail, and this feed works very, very well. So these pens all have a collar which screws in. We got my Model 20 here, so we're going to assemble this one, and we're also going to do it outside of the pen so you can see how the converter works, because as you can see on the end here, this is going to fit into there. So there's actually a little extension here in the collar, which I'm assuming could change based on if it's a standard converter or not. And these are also keyed the same way we saw on the Wahl Eversharp, with that flat section inside this collar. So when you put they're only going to fit in one way, and it's just a push to fit, and it stops. Now you can see at the back end where that extension that was in the feed is right at the end now, and that fits the converter very nicely. So that's how it looks like outside of the pen. This just screws into place in the pen. Makes replacing nibs and everything else an easy thing to do. And then when you unscrew this, the converter fits into place very easily, and that's how it works. So I'm going to use these stainless steel feeler gauges. This is very popular, available at one time when you had to do things like the points in your distributor or doing your spark plugs. So these start very thin and they work themselves up, and what I'm doing is I'm going up through thicker and thicker of these blades to just clean out and hopefully open up that feed a little bit. Right now all of these are fitting within that groove and seem to be working well. I mean, the groove is pretty deep. Hopefully this will increase that flow and get rid of the starvation issues that I was having with this pen before. What's nice with these feeler gauges is they have nice increments, so you can start working them into the feed and hopefully, like I said, maybe opening them up a little bit and getting a little bit more flow. Yeah, this is getting a little tight here, so this may be as big as I can get here without actually changing the feed arrangement. Sorry for the shaky camera. This is not the easiest thing to try to do over the camera. I cleaned up the back of the nib now, polished it, so that's nice and smooth. So there shouldn't be anything impeding the ink flow. I'm going to use this stainless steel shim to work the tines a little bit on this nib, and that barely fits through, but it does. So, you know, that was working good. We're going to go up now to 13 hundredths of a millimeter, and that's a little bit tight. In fact, it won't fit. So This looks like the biggest one that'll fit through here, but hopefully that's working well. The nib polished up well, so I'm happy about how it looks. We've opened up the feed as much as we can, so now it's time to reassemble. Most modern pens, you can see here, has a little bit of flat spot there that the nib fits into, so you need to align that well, and it only fits in one way, so we just push it into place. So I'm happy with how that fits. So the next stage is to ink it up and see if my efforts have worked out. We're going to do a little experiment. I haven't tried this before, but it's always good to look at the nib under a loupe to see how well the tines are aligned, how the tipping material is on there. I mean, it looks to be in good shape from what I can tell. I don't know how well this is working on the camera. We're going to have to check that out. But the tipping material is a little bit flattened there at the very end, so I'm going to see if that can be worked out a little bit with my emery board. The test comes into play is let's see how it writes. It is slightly better, but there is still something not right from my view on the way that this nib works on paper. It needs a lot of pressure to write. If you just put a little bit of pressure on, and it works well in that downstroke, but the cross strokes, it just needs pressure. So we're going to use the emery board, which I use for smoothing. This pink side is the rough side. Next to that is what we call medium, and then on the reverse side is fine. So what you know, this may have a little bit of baby's bottom, so I'm just going to do some downstrokes, some cross strokes, some circles. And I'm rotating the nib a little bit to try to maybe get rid of that flat spot. And then this is just basically a final thing, and then we're going to flip it over and just do a smoothing. As you can see, it still requires pressure to write. I'm not really certain why. It is wetter than it was before, and it is more consistent. I mean, it is smooth, but it's just that this nib just, again, it requires pressure to get the ink to flow. And the ink flows very well with the pressure. So this is a new ink. This is Aurora Blue Black, which I got a bottle when I went to one of their events in New York City, where they let us play around with their new flexible nib that they're planning to bring out. Those of you that went to the LA Pen Show, you probably got a chance to see that pen in action. They had 3 prototypes with them in New York, and I like the nib. Again, not comparing it to vintage flex, but just comparing it to modern nibs. It's nice and soft. And Auroras have great flow, and they're very well made. So it should be an interesting addition to the pens that we have to choose from. So overall, I'm going to basically say I've done a little bit of improvement on here, but the flow is still not what I want. It's better. Considering all the work that I did, I don't know what else to do. And it does write consistent, which it didn't do before, but again, it still needs pressure. I'm so used to my sailors, which I did that recent video on, where they write consistently all the time. So to eliminate that, ink might be a cause for this, so I've gone to an ink I know is well lubricated and flows well, and it's slightly different, but it still doesn't flow consistently like I would like it to and like I think it should. As you can see on the downward stroke with a little pressure, this thing lays out a decent amount of ink, so it's not a flow issue. I've smoothed this nib as much as I'm comfortable with, so it's not the ink. I mean, you can see there where it just doesn't flow consistently. You know, in writing, you're going to have different angles on the paper, but, you know, if you experiment, you know, even reverse, very light, but it flows. Not something I would do, but, you know. So that's a look at another ink. Like that, again, that stroke seems to not be consistent. I've continued to work on this nib, and I'm a terrible drawer, so bear with me. I think the issue is the way the tipping material is on the nib. There's a nice angle here, so, you know, the way that it almost like a triangle shape here. So if you look at it head on from, and you can see, again, it's very sensitive to that angle. And yeah, there's the tipping material here. And if you look at it, then this is kind of like that flat spot I talked about. So I've ground this. I've used some heavy-duty emery paper, which I'm not comfortable with. I'm assuming if I took this to a nib meister, they could tune this nib much better than I can with the tools that I have. So that's what I think the issue is, and also the fact that these tines are very, very tight. You know, even though I did my best to work that feeler gauge out there. So that's the area of contact. And like I said, maybe other people wouldn't find this writing as troublesome as I do, but it's just not what I'm used to. And maybe, like I said, I've been spoiled by my sailors and my deltas and my other pens, so that may be one of the reasons for my attempts to try to get this to work a little bit better. I think I've gotten it to as good as I can. As you can see how this was pretty much the same pressure, and the flow is just not consistent. There I put more pressure on, but it just, I've never had a nib that responded this way to that change in pressure. And my normal pressure is what you see here, and that's where you get a lot of variation in the writing. So sad to say, this is probably going to have to go to a nib meister if I want to get this nib tuned any better than I'm able to do it now. If you enjoyed this little look at how I treat my pens and how I try to get them to do what I want them to do. So, you know, any comments you have, I greatly appreciate it. If you liked the video, like it, and please subscribe. That seems to be how YouTube measures a publication success. So until next time, may you have many great writing experiences. Enjoy them all. Bye.